We'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, we'll get started. The Parks and Rec Board for September the 12th, 2024. We have Tammy on Zoom this evening. Hi, Tammy. We'll start with the approval of the minutes. Everybody want to?
I'll make a motion for their approval.
I second.
Okay. Minutes have been approved and second. Any objections? If not, we'll run on down to reports. And Parks and Recreation. I guess we'll start with Tammy.
Mr. Chairman there, Howard, if you don't mind, if we could skip over my report for this month, like just in an effort for me to conserve some energy here, as I am dealing with an illness. I'd like to kind of defer that off. I had a presentation planned for you guys, and I apologize to be tuning in this way. But I didn't want to miss the meeting in case there are any updates that you needed. But I'd like to defer my report, if you don't mind, until October, and then I'll kind of come back and talk extensively and in detail, particularly about the programming and everything that's gone on this summer, if that's okay.
Not a problem. Not a problem
appreciate
at
it.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you. The Board of Commissioners. Mr. Abel.
I do not have any reports to provide this evening.
Shade Tree Commission. I guess I'm doing this.
I can just give kind of a brief report on that. At the last meeting, when we, as the Parks Board, met in July, I had notified the board that a tree risk assessment in the parks was conducted. There is an extensive report that had been posted under the Public Works Department link on the Township website, so I'll encourage you again to take a look at that. I know there was a number of trees that were authorized on Monday night at the Board of Commissioners meeting that were going to be pruned and or removed. So if you want to take a look at that or review the meeting, you're more than welcome to. But just on behalf of the Shade Tree as well, I know that they're getting ready to engage their fall tree planting and also continuing to relook at different areas of their ordinance that I know where there have been some changes that have been up before the Board of Commissioners as well. So a brief report on their behalf. If you have any questions, I can certainly dig into stuff a little bit further and provide you with more information if you're interested.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions at this time? Okay. All right then. Guess we can move down to other reports, if there are none. New business. Dogs in Ditmar Park.
Is it okay to talk now?
As requested by Commissioner Abel.
Yep. I appreciate you placing this item on the agenda. This is a point that I've made several times over the last several months, particularly when we were discussing the leash issue at the Willows, and when you created the leash laws at the Willows, you know, when you put new policies in place, they have to be enforced, and so you take the Willows, and now let's broaden that to all of our parks. You know, we have ordinances in all of our parks, including prohibiting dogs in many of the parks. However, many neighbors take dogs to these parks. and they've done so for years. But if you're going to enforce ordinances at the Willows, at some point you're going to have to enforce ordinances at all the parks. And I have an issue with well, first of all, I have a question and haven't really been able to get an answer to. How did the ordinance at Ditmar Park come about? You know, what's the genesis of it? What was the intent? And you know, doing research, we haven't been able to, I think, identify that meeting or that point in Radnor's history where that was discussed. So, you know, that's one point that, you know, I'd love to have an answer to. Second, you know, Ditmar Park for that neighborhood is the safest place to walk your dog. There are many families in that neighborhood in West Wayne who are dog owners. That area, if you're not familiar with that area of West Wayne, they don't have sidewalks. There's 3 schools, 2 churches, and there's a lot of sports activities that go on all weekend and all evening long. So, you know, to me, the safest place that we want those people to walk their dog is the park. It has a path. It's surfaced. You know, people are out of there by dusk anyway, so they're there during normal hours, and you know, the issues that I've seen at the park don't have anything to do with people not picking up after their dogs. I mean, most of the litter in the parks has to do with athletic teams and games that are played there. That's where you see the most debris left. So, you know, my request is that, you know, this board, you know, start the process and hopefully come to a conclusion that, you know, there's no need. People have walked their dogs there for years. I've checked the records over the last 5 years. There's no instances. There's no calls to the police. You know, I haven't heard a neighbor complain about interactions with dogs at that park. So I'm hoping that we can remove that prohibition on dogs. Otherwise, I think, you know, we're going to put the law enforcement in a tough spot when people start calling saying there's dogs in the park. I don't think we want our police out there, you know, ticketing neighbors who are just trying to be safe and doing the right thing by walking their dogs on a surface path.
Commissioner Abel, I'm happy to jump in and answer a couple of those questions if you'd like me to, particularly with regards to the original policy setting at Ditmar Park. That stems back to the early 2000s when the park came to fruition, when the land was purchased and it became a park. That policy has its origins way back then. So just a couple of clarifications just for everybody. The policies with regards to where dogs are permitted and when or where they are not permitted is not ordained, with the exception of Skunk Hollow currently, where we have a very obviously detailed new ordinance that was implemented. So the rest of the parks had became the byproduct of a policy that was made internally. I have to believe that at the time when Ditmar came to fruition, there was a discussion with the Parks Board that had set that policy. I was not the director at the time, so I wouldn't have been in attendance at a meeting where that occurred. I do know that in 2015, when I was in my role, we had a discussion at length with the Parks and Recreation Board, and we went back and we re-looked at all the parks from A to Z, because we had a couple parks at that time that did not have a policy, such as North Wayne and Petrie, a couple of the later parks that had come to fruition. And part of the prompting of where that discussion started was with Emlyn Tennell, because there was desire to change a policy at that park that was very specific, that had specific hours when you could walk your dog and when you couldn't. So we had some residents that were emphatic about changing that so that dogs could be permitted there, particularly on the walking path, which is a similar, obviously, setup as Ditmar Park is. So I hope that speaks to the origin of the policy. I do feel it's important in the future that we establish and ordain the policies of all the parks. I do think that is important, and I think that helps put to rest, I think, a lot of the unrest that's currently, situated with this board with regards to dogs in parks in general. And then that just kind of ties to the police department. I know it's been very difficult for them with a mishmash of lots of different policies. So we want to help make that as easy as possible for them so that, they can enforce when there are calls or reports. But certainly, I think that some of the origin also, I'm just speculating, probably had to do with the fact that it was an athletic field, and trying not to commingle, the dogs on the field and the high level of athletic play that goes on, was probably the intent. Again, I'm just speculating, but obviously something that could be re-reviewed, especially given where we are. I think there's definitely motivation by this board to relook at some of these spaces and finally, hopefully, put some detail together where we can put this in the ordinance so that it does give, again, enforcement some teeth, and clear understanding of, which parks, have what policies. Because right now, we have a little bit of a, difference there, and things that are policies and they're not in the ordinance or in the code. So I think that's definitely problematic, to try and address that. I mean, we've gotten calls on all parks, where folks know that there are no dogs in parks. Like, we get a lot of calls and we get input just in general that comes from residents that don't go to police. We may have had one or two over the years on Ditmar, but nothing that was ever generated in terms of a police report or anything, or an incident. So just to kind of answer that question there, just to kind of, give some feedback. So I hope that helps put a little bit of background, on at least in my experience and my history.
I appreciate that, but I think the bigger issue to me is the safety of the neighbors, and more so now than even last year. They just resurfaced Valley Forge Road, and everyone knows what happens when you resurface a road. Those potholes are gone, and people can open up. And so with no sidewalks, you now have a dog walker, one, possibly two dogs, and there's very little in terms of a shoulder, a grass area that you can go into as you get closer to Ditmar Park. So I would think just for safety reasons, knowing that people use it regardless of those signs being up, it just makes sense to take the signs down and allow people to do what they've done for years, walk their dogs and then go home. I've seen one dog that regularly goes on the playing surface. So of all the families that walk there, I've seen one dog on there. So I don't know that I'm concerned about people going there and letting their dogs roam free on the playing surface. That's if that was an issue, I would rethink my position. But I just think now that school's back in, buses are crowding those roads. If anyone's been there in the morning or in the afternoon when the Unitarian Church lets out or starts, that car line goes down Valley Forge. It goes down Maplewood, and so let's separate. Let's get the people off the street and where they can walk safely.
Tammy, is it possible to get the map of the dogs permitted in township parks on our screen so we can see it together? It's on the township.
I don't think I can share it.
I can list, I have it on my screen.
Right now. It's on the website, so I don't know if you have access I don't know if you have a computer right in front of you. I can't see behind the.
I do, Tammy. If
You do?
I can read them if you, that would be helpful, Clark? Is that what you're looking
Yeah, or I can read them, whichever. But you could access the map. I don't know if I know Ian was kind of in between two meetings that he's running tonight, but the map is on the website.
Just as a quick comment, and perhaps we can see it, and to Jake's point, I did read your message about this, and it led me to look at this map. It led me to remember the process that we went through for Skunk Hollow and the Willows.
Tammy,
Obviously-
where exactly on the website?
Would be
Oh,
under
I'm sorry. Okay, so if you go to Parks and Recreation, Parks
Dog
and
parks and
Facilities, and then
trails.
go to Dogs in Parks and Trails, and if you scroll down, at the bottom, there's the map, and there's also the list. You could put that up too, where it says dogs are not permitted in the following parks, dogs are permitted in the following parks.
I believe in October, we tried our best with a lot of emotional testimony to kind of come to a conclusion that kind of satisfied a balance, and to wait to see how our process of at least limiting dogs in the Willows or Skunk Hollow would go. After a year now, I think it was October that we had one of our larger meetings, I think your message has re-stimulated kind of the question is, do we need a better standard? You know, and looking to the park, and I walk through that park too, it makes sense that you should be able to walk your dog in that park. But when we look to this map, there's definitely a hodgepodge of rules, and I get to, how do we enforce this? And dogs off leash, dogs on leash, and it just feels as though we just don't have a standard as we do in our neighboring communities. So I think we need to retool this, and unfortunately, it's a process that we're going to have probably more input, but it's looking to making sure the rules are the same at all the parks, including that. I frankly wouldn't be averse to dogs in Ditmar, but it goes to the point of leash and rules of conduct in every park, and I think that's what we're going to have to address with the standard. Because right now, there were some historical limits on where dogs were, often for playing fields, small parks, playgrounds. I could definitely see limits on playing fields. I don't think it's appropriate to have animals defecating on high play fields. It costs us a lot of money to maintain. I think that's one. I think playgrounds, in particular fenced-off playgrounds, are an area where I think there's safety concerns, frankly, that you can easily make a case for limitations. I think we need to revisit the Willows, frankly, as well. I think we've given an opportunity of observation there for a year. I think despite very, good people walking their dogs there and keeping them under control, there continue to be very difficult and dangerous interactions at times that I think prohibit, like, many people from wanting to hike those trails at certain times. So I think that needs to be revisited, unfortunately. I just think due to issues of safety, issues of community standards elsewhere, I think we're in an urban community. I don't think we're in the rural community that we can kind of employ, a complete, no leash rule. I just think the leash rule comes into play with this type of park. So.
Yeah, I mean, I agree on having your dogs leashed, especially at a park like Ditmar. And I don't see many. I've seen a few off leash, but most are on leash and behaved. And I think to that point, we haven't seen any incidents reported from that park. And to your point, I fully support a process. It's why I'm here tonight, to have the conversation started and let you guys discuss. And if it needs to be discussed at multiple meetings, I'm happy to attend and participate.
I think I'm very open to that park in particular, but I think we need to apply it to each park with, dog access, particularly, service dogs and whatnot, which are very, very, going to be part of, individuals being there, but rules. And I think we need to standardize it across the whole park and put a period at the end of it, because this has been drawn out. We shouldn't be back every few months deciding which park is leash or no leash, or dog or no dog. It's just a standard. I think we also need at least areas that are open, dog run, that are established, so when individuals go there, they know that dogs can be off leash. For those that are walking through, we need to acknowledge there's a very strong group of people that have interest in, and I acknowledge that, and it's important for them. I think we need an area where they can have their dogs off leash, but it needs to be much like every other dog park that exists in the United States, zoned off, clearly marked that it's open, and not excluding other people from using an asset. So.
Just a few thoughts, and thank Commissioner for bringing that to our attention. I think I share some of the thoughts that Clark had about just some kind of continuity. A couple of points in no particular order. I think we should have a process where we look at this in toto. My thought is that we're going to have sort of a slippery slope of neighborhood by neighborhood. We want our park to have nothing, have access for dogs as well, and that could be a valid intention to have, and it's something we can revisit. But I think one thing I like what we have now, of the 19 parks listed, we have a balance with 9 dogs permitted and 10 not permitted. And putting aside a number of issues, we should have recreational opportunities. We've strove on this board to do that, to have a diversity of opportunities, and that includes the opportunity to have your dogs and have that, as well as be free from dogs. I think the ball fields there do create a concern, but that has to be balanced with the safety concerns of pedestrian access that Commissioner Abel brings up. So I think we should look at that. One thing I don't want to see defeat change is the argument of enforcement. We have literally millions of laws and rules, and a very small fraction of them are ever enforced. We have speed limits. The purpose of the rules is, of course, to give police the ability to enforce them if need be, but it's to set a standard. And I think we are lacking a standard at this point, and some additional discussion is probably worthwhile in that regard. And I'm open. I came in here thinking no to this issue, but having heard the safety concerns, I think it's worthy of discussion, and perhaps in a larger context as well, to look at this issue.
It's been my observation that, when I look at this list of parks where dogs are permitted, I know in the park where we live, there are dogs, and the owners are, I've watched them, and they're very strategic. They go to a certain location in the park. It's not on the fields or with the kids or up by the playground. They all congregate at a lower portion. And so what that lends it to is that rather than throw out the policy in and of itself, do some tweaking to the policy where we begin to talk about what is going to be the dog area and what are some of the ways that they can function safely in those areas where the kids are still safe, but the dogs get a chance. Because, this is not like years ago when the dog was just a pet. Nowadays, the dog is a part of the family. And I think we have to take that culture on and not offend those who are dog owners, because they're like their quasi-children. And so having, being able to support their rights is important. I know that sounds crazy, but that's where we are. And so if we can work with the policy to say, okay, let's make some adjustments. We have this policy in place. We have the enforcement. We have all these things. Let's go back and let's double check ourselves and see what can we do to balance it so that it's not just no dogs or just dogs, but if they're going to be dogs, here's where they have to be. Here's the rules of where they have, you know what I mean? As opposed to just no dogs or dogs, policy or no policy. I think the standard, comment is important, because without it, people are just kind of all over the place. The people at our park have really kind of they've checked themselves, if you will. They have, I watch them. They park at the top of the park. Their dogs run down through the park or whatever, and they all congregate down at the bottom where the old log cabin used to be. This is at Odoricio. Where the old log cabin used to be, they're away from everybody. They play together. The dogs know each other. They're like dog friends. You get what I'm saying? So to say, well, this is a no-dog park just feels wrong. It just doesn't feel right to me. I very easily could just call the police and say, hey, there's a bunch of dogs in the park, but that doesn't feel right to me, because they've policed themselves and they've organized themselves. Maybe we just need to update ourselves on what that's going to be so that we're all on the same page.
It's Odoricio Park, you're
I'm
right.
sorry?
Odoricio Park.
Yes.
And
And that's not one of,
it's
exactly.
it's a red paw park, so again, it goes to just standardizing, and making sure that we're in agreement in terms of leash laws, where it's appropriate, where dogs are not allowed. And I would, again, playing fields, enclosed playgrounds, those are the ones I would ask.
I believe this is going to be a very complex issue because we're both in the same area as Artoricio Park. And I've seen something different than what you've seen. I have seen strategic times where certain people will go with their dogs to the park and let them loose in the playing fields, where they're now playing soccer for the school. Watch them with their dogs down there at that point. So to me, it becomes a safety issue for the kids. And then you also have the sidewalks that are on West Wayne Avenue and on Holland Avenue. But yet the dog walkers continue to bring their dogs through the parks where their signs are clearly said, no dogs permitted. So, I mean, it's going to be a very complex issue for me as well, because we're going to have to be very careful in how we tweak this, because we want to make sure that everybody, as much as we possibly can, the people are accommodated and to be dog friendly as much as possible. But it's a very complex issue, and I can see why it's been drawn out for so long, because you've got different dynamics of this whole thing to put together.
Sorry to interrupt. Hi, everyone. Odoricio started getting used because Friends of Radnor Trails Park was closed because of construction. And it wasn't permitted, but it was getting used by dog people with dogs going over there. And now Friends of Radnor Trail, that's finished. So there's less people using the dogs at Odoricio, or bringing dogs to Odoricio.
But there's still dogs that go in Odoricio.
Yeah, but
Again, as Mr. Howard said, they shouldn't be on the field ever, and at any of our parks. And like Emlyn Tunnel that's up there, it has a path to go around. You're only supposed to have the dog on the path that goes around, not in the middle of the field. I've seen them on the middle of the field. I've seen them at Clement Crone go to the bathroom in the middle of the field and just walk away. It happens, but, and you guys knew this from back when we had 200-plus people here before, that the Pennsylvania law, all dogs must be under control and must not be allowed to run at large. Like, that's key. There are spots. Haverford has a spot where you can go in, and it's got the double fence thing, and you can go in there with a dog. We don't have that. We have parks that anybody can wander in from anywhere. The dogs should not, and it's against the law for them to run at large. So while we're thinking of this, we've got to make sure that we're still following the law when we're doing it.
If I may, just a couple of follow-ups. Number one, I do think it's important, and we do have spaces which folks can go if they wish to be free from the presence and interference or interaction, I should say, with pets. Much like I think there should be a spot where folks can go and have their pets run free. I think we need to have a balance on that. And I look in Jim and my side of the township, you have Macrone, no dogs, playing fields, playgrounds, and then you have just up the street, Tunnel, where you can take a dog. So there's not a major inconvenience. So I think we need to look at it from that standpoint. The other thing that I bring, which we haven't mentioned yet, is in my day job, I see what happens when this goes wrong. And that is I've handled, unfortunately, too many cases where there's the interaction of dogs and humans and pets. And as stewards of the parks and the township's assets, we need to keep that in mind, that the township, on notice in many of these parks of these incidents, is at risk for legal action against it for not taking proper steps to prevent these incidents. Putting aside the human cost of things, if we aren't monitoring this properly, that no one wants anything bad to happen to anybody or their pets as well. So that's a thing that needs to be brought to the discussion, is a safety component as well.
I think if you end up having incidents in a park, that's an automatic, that comes back before a board for rediscussion. And I agree with you on having space for both people who want to bring their dogs and people who want to be away from pets. And I'm just going to use Ditmar as an example. That bowl set up at Ditmar creates an opportunity for both. And if you go there at lunchtime, you'll have teachers from St. David's Church walking at lunch. They're not walking with dogs, so they walk, and then when they come up behind a dog walker, the dog walker typically steps to the gravel side or gets into the grass area and allows the walkers to pass and pass safely, and then they'll continue on their way. So I think most people will use common sense and allow people to have that space, and a park like Ditmar is perfect for that opportunity. I'm not going to say that there's not those few people that will try to ruin it for the vast majority, but I hope we're not going to govern with those people in mind. Let's think about the greater good of the community, and that we can all use these spaces and use them and cohabitate there together.
Oh, sorry, at Ditmar, are we thinking the entire thing or just the back further field?
No. So my point at the beginning was, we have 3 schools, we have 2 churches, and we have sports activities that are nonstop. The neighborhood does not have sidewalks.
I know that. Just like
So
they
the-
have the field that's closer
So-
to say Wayne Elementary, or the one that's further back,
So,
like they have
well-
more space back.
So the safest place for dog walkers in the neighborhood is to be able to walk their dogs on the path.
Yeah,
So the path
all the way around.
goes all the way around.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't limit it to saying you can only walk the front field.
Right.
And you have to cut down by this picnic table and then make a left.
Yeah, right.
It's a nice walk on a nice day, and people do it and they return home. And I see the same people out there multiple times during the day.
The nuance with that park is they have a great trail, and it's perfect for walking your dog. But we're not at the point of giving carte blanche to, have your 5 dogs that you're walking run over the field, which has been, the opposite. So
Yeah.
that's where we're looking for that kind
Yep.
of standard rule. Yes, we have other parks, you look to near Radnor, where we have those great fields. People walk around there with their dogs too, but we don't want them on that field. So it's just how do you moderate in that circumstance? And I think, frankly, I'd like to have dog owners be able to take their dogs to the places all that they want to go. It's just we live in a society, though, that there's many of us, so we have to share it. And I think just the free run of dogs in parks is where we have some concerns, and how we control it and how we legislate it so our policemen can enforce it without having to look the other way because everyone's doing it however they want to do it. Because I think that's where we're at right now. People are just doing whatever they want to do, and it's not working.
Yeah, well, I mean, people, but it's not just today. I mean, this has been going on for years.
Yeah.
And so my point during the Willows conversation was, there has to be a process. There has to be standards.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why we're overlooking it during the Willows discussion, but I think we're at that point. Like, there's more parks, and if the theme of the Willows was everybody has a right to be in that park, dog owner, non-dog owner, that same theme should cover all parks.
I agree. And I think the other factor, as much as you said, there are growing concerns just about the potential injury and liabilities related to this. So we just have to really mirror what our local townships are doing. We shouldn't be an outlier in our rules or flexibility or lack of rules thereof. I think we should really just mirror what is the standard.
And sorry, the Willows, it's really Skunk Hollow.
Specifically, this.
Well, yeah, we're not allowed in the Willows Park.
Yes.
Dogs.
Yeah.
Right, even though you say you park there and then you go up, but every time I go there, people go to that parking spot and let their dogs out of their car, not on a leash. They run around cars, there's cars backing up, There's kids walking around, it's like, and there, truthfully think we should have more signage. I know some signage was stolen or taken or whatever, but that's Goncalo.
I have to stress that the vast majority of dog owners, and I've been a dog owner, I love dogs, you know, are great, responsible citizens, but there's just ongoing concerns that just have not been placated by our attempts to kind of put some limits in place. So that's where I think we're going to have to revisit this issue again. So, with a standard.
Any other comments? What do we do?
I would just make a motion. It's October was when we had our last conversation about this. If we can put it on the agenda for October to have a discussion of key points that we would like to address for a standard set of rules governing this issue.
If that's a motion, I'll second.
It's been motioned in second. All in favor? Aye. So we'll put that on the agenda for October then? All right. All righty. Moving along here. Enke Park Playground recommended parking and access.
Yes, this is an item that I wanted to present to the board. I had some visuals planned. We actually do have those out on the website. Ian, I don't know if you're able to bring up the Parks directory under Enke Park and show an image that's been placed there. If not, that's okay. I can talk us through it. So since the popularity of the Enke Park playground, as you know, right there at the Radnor Township has grown, of course, over the years, and
I'm sorry, Tim,
We
you
see a
should be
high-
able to screen share, actually, if that's
so-
easier.
I can't see the screen. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, what was it on the website? I'll bring it up.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's under Enke. If you go to the Parks directory, and then you scroll down to Enke Park, and if you click on that, you should be able to get the images that we had placed up there. So what we're trying to do is establish a little bit of a different access. So what the habit has really been, you know, in the mornings, throughout the day, you know, be it, you know, during school, not during school, a lot of the folks that access Enke Park Playground, they usually park in the parking lot that's right along Ivan Avenue, the one that's right next to the two big houses that are just being built. I'm sure you're familiar with that small lot that's right there. It has a little access area that goes right onto Ivan Avenue with a chain across it. So if you drive into the driveway, a lot of folks typically who are using the park and using the playground specifically, they park in that parking lot. Because the habit has been is that the township employees either park in the upper parking lot or the township lot where you see a lot of the police vehicles, or they park in the lower lot, which is down near the creek, right along Creek Drive, in front of the main access to the building where the police department is. So what we've tried to do is put together a plan, and I'm not sure if that image is up on the screen right now, but we tried to put together a plan so that we're now telling all of our township employees that they need to park in the lot that's along Ivan Avenue, so that essentially in the morning when employees are arriving, they're filling that lot, therefore not having an opportunity necessarily for the park playground access and users to park in that lot. So we're trying to move all of the folks that are using the lot down to the lower lot, essentially near the skate park, and then asking them to come across the walking bridge that goes up to where the batting cages are, right at, in between the two ball fields, and essentially walk across the field to access the playground. And this is really being done for their safety. We've been watching for years as the increase in participation, use of the playground has grown. We have so many people that are walking down that little hill right along Ivan Avenue, and we've got cars constantly, going up and down and into that area. Sometimes when two cars meet each other on that little hill that slopes down towards the accessible parking spot to the playground, it gets very tight. We have a lot of children that are running around in that area. They like to stop and look into the creek, and they're usually with caregivers and things like that. And just for their safety, we're trying to ask them to park in the lower lot near the skate park, as I had mentioned, and I assume the diagram is up to show you. And a lot of people have been doing it and following it. So now that we're retraining the employees to basically take up the lot along Ivan, it's really starting to now force the playground users down there. I consider this a stopgap measure. There's definitely hope in the future that we can reestablish the walking bridge that goes across the creek so that it becomes an accessible bridge. Right now, it's not accessible. It's very narrow. And then, of course, once you actually get into the park, you have to walk up a little hill that's not ADA, it's not accessible. And then there's no pathways when you get there. So ultimately, in the future, we'd like to come up with some, new design in that way. That's a big project to redesign that area and make it accessible and add the corresponding parkways that are needed to make it, ADA. But for the time being, we're hoping that folks take advantage of using this as an alternative and a safer alternative. That's how we've been communicating it. So we've distributed signage at the playground. We've posted flyers at the playground, and I can say that I can see through my outside of my window where I am at the office. People have been using it, so I think that's a good sign. And then obviously, if they need park accessibility from a handicap standpoint, there is a handicap spot that's adjacent to the playground, which we'll continue to encourage them to use. So I wanted to just put this before the board as a presentation, as informational, so we can continue to spread the word to the users. We know that there are a lot of users in the neighborhoods. I know we've enlisted a couple of the commissioners that are in that ward to help us distribute some information in their newsletters. They know they have constituents that actually use the park and use the playground frequently. And hopefully that's a new habit we can, start to inject for everyone's safety. Because we recognize this is a very popular spot. And again, really at all times, during the school year, during the summer, obviously during the nicer weather, it's extremely well utilized. We recognize that this is a busy location. We've got the skate park, we've got baseball, all kinds of things going on with the township and meetings. So, and just trying to juggle that, because inevitably, it's a tough spot, and trying to keep everybody safe. There are times when police need to leave quickly. If you've ever been at the building and you've seen the police fly out of this location, in pursuit, it definitely gives some cause for concern to take a look at that. But that's one of those items that would be in the capital budget long term. I'm not sure at what point, that generates funding. It would be a pretty significant cost to reestablish a new bridge, accessibility, and all that goes along with that. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. It's an education process we're going to continue on, and hopefully, again, helps mitigate some safety factors that we've had concerns about at the building.
Any questions on the board or anything? Okay, Tammy, we're gonna.
Can I ask
I'm
a
sorry.
question?
Sure.
Tammy, you may not be the appropriate person to answer this, but to your point that this is a popular area, and you named skate park, baseball fields, playground. You go back there to that lower lot where you now want everyone to park, and actually every day there's probably 12 to 15 spaces taken up by police vehicles. Is there a discussion within the township of looking at alternative locations to park those vehicles, because they're not ones that are used on a daily basis?
So we have had those discussions internally. In fact, I think some of the vehicles, as possible, have been moved and relocated to the Public Works building. I think a couple of the vehicles have been sold off. We're trying to ask police to keep them further up on the opposite side of the skate park. So like to the west, basically, like fill the western part of the lot so that it does leave the majority of the lot closer to the skate park and closer to where the bridge access is open. So we are having those discussions and trying to be creative on, different ways and places where those can be parked. I know that the township is, the township is currently endeavoring, I think it was a project that was recently bid for electric stations for some of the hybrid and electric-based vehicles that not only we have currently, but that we have, the prospect of buying in the future. So I think that too is going to change some of the configuration of the parking, particularly adjacent to the building. So maybe that in turn helps to filter out some of those vehicles so there's not as many of them around. But we have been working together on that and will continue to, just to make sure that there's not, just vehicles that aren't being utilized, just parked around, and trying to be creative of where we can relocate them.
Yeah, I think those open spots would be much appreciated to probably more than anybody, baseball families on Saturday afternoons, so they're not parking back in the apartments or trying to cram in on the grass, on the other side of the parking lot. Does the township, do they rent space or do they park any vehicles at the Sinclair building?
So we've made requests to use the Sinclair building for events. So for instance, when the Radnor Run takes place and we have, crazy amount of vehicles that are parked on the site every year, we have that as overflow parking. So we've been able to work with the owner of that building. But to my knowledge right now, we are not utilizing any parts of that building. In fact, I understood there's some usage going on at that building currently, because I know we just had a discussion about whether or not that building was going to ultimately be sold. That building's been there and been empty
Right.
for the 25 years I've been here. I think when I first got here, there was some operation that was going on in part of it. But I believe there is something that's been restored there. Again, just something I heard in passing. But currently we do not lease or rent space there. I know we have a good working relationship with the owner of the Radnor Preserve apartment building. I'm not aware of anybody parking there other than maybe on the weekends for baseball when they do need an extra spot. But we've had a good relationship and there hasn't been any concerns or issues. I know people park all along the road there,
I can.
especially along the skate park when that area becomes filled up. So we definitely have a space and a parking issue at the site.
I can tell you on a Monday night when we're having a board meeting and there's a baseball game going on, and I'm coming from a soccer practice, I frequently park back at the apartments, walk into the building and find, a police officer and just say, hey, I'm parked back there, please don't tow me. So I think there's benefit to trying and exploring options to open up as many spots back there as possible, especially if the intent is to increase safety for the park users.
I would agree. Just that, I remember when that lot was purely a park lot, and it's really, last 10 years has become a parking lot. So we really need to reclaim that parking lot for the park, so any way possible.
There's also been some discussions about whether or not there could be an expansion to some parking at Capelli as well. I don't believe the neighbors are supportive of that, just based on some preliminary discussions we had about trail access in the past. We were discussing that relative to the trail extension. So it's just another area to take a look at to see if we can filter some of the baseball usage, to Capelli and be able to provide an access way, into the ball fields, to the ball fields from there as well. So I think a comprehensive look of everything together is really important. At some point, the skate park is going to have to be renovated, and I know that will probably be something that would come into discussion as well. Is that a time when we should discuss relocating the skate park to another location? I'm not sitting here saying I'm an advocate for that, but I'm just throwing that on the table as another option to be able to open up parking at the site.
Hi, did this sound right? Okay. I just had one comment. I know a lot of the families that use the park come with their kids in strollers, and it seems like a long way through the grass to push a stroller. Assuming that they're going through the grass the whole time. I'm not sure if there's anything that can be done about that, depending on how long they're gonna be using that parking lot to access the park. And if you've ever tried to push a double stroller through grass, it's nearly impossible.
I agree. So, I think what we're trying to advocate here is just the overall safety benefit. We're not trying to deter anybody from parking anywhere else. And by all means, if they park in that lot and they want to walk, continue to walk over, or if, there's going to be time when they're going to come into the parking along Ivan Avenue, they're going to see an open spot, and out of habit, they're going to continue to park. We realize that. Or if they are, frequenting the park with strollers or a double stroller. A double stroller is not even going to go across the bridge. It's not wide enough. So again, this is a recommended measure for safety due to the level of vehicular traffic. It's certainly not something that, we're enforcing and policing or anything like that. Because the opportunity in the future to renovate the bridge, basically, replacing the bridge essentially at that point and creating the accessibility into the park is a very big project. There's a lot of slopes. There's a buffer along the creek line. There's a lot of engineering that's going to go into grading and things like that to make those changes and make that feasible. And I've tried to think of things like, okay, like could we do a wood chip path? Does that make it easier? Does it make it more definable? I really don't know that it does. In fact, I think wood chips are tough anyways to get through with a stroller. So I think I would just suggest that, we want people to have, the path of least resistance. And if they still feel that that path is, going down over the slope, and taking the roadway, I'll call it, to get in there, then we're certainly not going to restrict them from doing that.
Okay. Any other comments on the Yankee Park playground? Okay, if not, we'll move down to Fenimore Woods pond conditions.
Okay, this is me also. So I was prepared to give a pretty extensive presentation tonight. I wanted to acknowledge that as we got into the summer months, the Fenimore Woods pond algae buildup has become very significant. In fact, it's the worst that I've seen it in my tenure, which caused me to take a really deep dive, no pun intended, and really trying to meet with companies and do some studies of the pond to see what's going on. I know we have residents that live in the back of the pond in the areas along Shimoni. I know they have growing concerns as well. I've been having a lot of conversations with them. I know that some of the initial thoughts was, okay, like let's just drop some fountains in the pond. Let's get the water circulating, and that's going to clear up the problem. So I took a long journey in looking at a lot of different options to see what we could do. And I kind of was just going to step through a couple of those with you. In looking at fountains and, what I'll call aeration systems, whether that's submersive aeration systems that are under the water and or those that are elevated. At this point where the pond has currently been with the terms of its accumulation, it's just not going to be feasible. Any system of fountains at this point, they're going to clog. It's going to become very jammed. They're going to be systems and mechanisms that just aren't going to function at this point. And I've met with the same company that we have that deployed the fountains that are over at the Willows. I've talked with a couple of other companies that manufacture more aggressive high volume systems. And at this point, that's just not feasible. We'd essentially be wasting our money if we were to do that and putting in a system that's just going to clog and require a lot of maintenance. So I had another company come in to take a look at the sediment that's growing in the pond. So that's where there's definitely cause for concern. So if I could just take a quick step back, in 2017, when we were endeavoring the Fenimore Woods Park Improvement Project, we did have an extensive, what you'll call as a bathymetric study, essentially of the pond that was done, where the depths of the pond, the water volume, and all of the areas were mapped out so that we could get an understanding of really what was going on in terms of how much water volume is really being reduced, as a result of the sediment that's been built up for so many years. This is a pond that is historic, goes back to the late 1800s. I'm not aware of it ever having any type of dredging or raking or any type of scraping in terms of the subsurface to remove the sediment and the runoff and the muck that has accumulated over the years. So we know that that volume is significant. That taken into consideration with the blanket of algae that has festered on the top of the pond, which comes from a result of what's going on under the pond. So essentially, we have a fibrous algae that's building up. It's considered a filamentous algae that's very coarse. I actually had some pictures of it that I had taken out of the pond. It looks like big clumps of hair. Essentially, it's actually referred to as horsehair. So what's happening is it's essentially a result of all the muck and the buildup of the organic sedimentation on the bottom of the pond that's really causing this to grow, and it's really become out of control. So any type of fountain option at this point isn't going to be feasible. Maybe more of a long-term solution, but on the forefront of the pond right now, we essentially are going to have to look at some type of a method, whether it be dredging, hydro raking, mechanical harvesting, something of that nature, where machinery would be brought into the pond, and essentially that sedimentation is going to be scraped out of the pond to be able to get the elevations back that are needed to restore the depths. So just to give you some idea, back in 2017, when we had the original study done, we were looking at average depths across the pond, essentially of about 3.5 feet of water volume. In the deepest spot at that point, it was about 10.5 feet. And then I had another company come in, and they actually went out. I had a lot of pictures and stuff planned for you guys. I apologize, I'm not there to really show that tonight, so I'm just trying to describe it as best as I can. I had a company come out, and they went out in a boat, and they did a sonar test throughout most of the pond that they were able to get through. So the eastern part of the pond, ironically, which is on the Eastern University side of the pond, has some greater depths, but not much. So comparing from where it was in 2017 at 10.5 feet, it's now down to barely 8 feet in very small sections. So I think anybody that's been over there recently can see this has definitely been a situation that proliferated. It's gotten really out of control. And again, I had a lot of pictures and everything to show you. We had drone pictures that flew over the pond to show you different time frames and different things, and how this has grown and gotten, more out of control. And to give you some example, when the last company I had out there to study the depths, they couldn't get through most of the pond because it was just too shallow. So anything that would have been 3.5 feet back in 2017, they couldn't even take a boat through now, because the majority of the depths are at about 1 feet in and around that ballpark. So they had put together a mapping of the depths on a very preliminary, basic way that they could, again, with the information that they were able to generate. And this was in late July. So at that point, it was pretty far out of control. So the next step really, to be able to get back to a healthy volume, there's going to have to be a significant investment put into the pond to basically bring out the sedimentation that's built up over the years. Again, I'm not aware of any time, at least during my 25-year history, where we've gone in and we've brought any sedimentation out of the pond in any way, shape, or form. I don't know that that ever happened. I think that was done at one point at the Willows, maybe early in the 2000s, but I'm not aware of it ever happening at Fenimore. So the on the near term, what I'd like to see happen in conversations that I'm having internally to move on quickly, because I'm very worried about this blanket of algae that's really essentially suffocating the pond at this point, is to bring a company in, another company that I later met with, that essentially could skim the pond and run a system through it that will basically bring this blanket of algae off the pond. Of course, we would have to lay it and dewater it, and then it's going to have to be hauled away. And that's something we can do relatively inexpensively now, as really just a short-term method to try and, get some oxygen built back into the pond, that so that there's not this continued algae growth, which really the sunlight is just causing it to continue to grow. And I realize we're going to be going into the winter months, and usually this is a situation that resolves itself. So, this is something that's been going on for years. As I know that anybody who lives over there has been over at the Willow or at the Fenimore Pond has seen over the years. But it seems really dramatic this year, which is why I wanted to take a deep look at it. I met with about 6 different companies just to kind of, hear and receive information and understand a little bit more about what's going on. The other issue that's been working against us is that we don't have water coming through the weir. There's a channel that flows next to the pond, of which I think you guys are aware was just renovated. The culvert was renovated. The weir channel was renovated. We also have a valve that had been broken that was renovated to allow when we have heavier rainstorms and there's a lot of water flowing through, that we can bring that water into the pond to help work that flow and that system through, go through and work through the pond to be able to elevate the oxygen levels. Because that's basically what's happening is there's no water movement. So it's not generating the circulation that's needed and the flow that's needed to be able to bring that oxygen level and move it through. So I know on August 7th, and again, I had some pictures to show you, but on August 7th, right around that time frame, we had a heavy storm, or a couple of heavy storms over a series of days, and we were able to open the valve, and the water was flowing, and you could see in about a quarter of the pond, all of the algae had moved away because we had flow that was coming through. The problem is that, it hasn't rained much, and it quickly dried up again where the flow stopped on the weir. In fact, I'm working with the engineer, Township engineer Steve Norsini. We're looking at different ways that we could reconfigure the channel to be able to drop it down so that there is a flow, so that we can have periods of no rain and still be able to achieve some water flow, that we can bring that into the pipe. So, into the pipe and therefore into the pond. So that's another concern. So really tonight, I was trying to just bring this up because I think it's a very important issue. I know that the park is under a spotlight because we have a major renovation we're obviously looking at doing. And I want to make sure that we have conversation going about the pond. I've also met with some groups of residents that live around the area, and specifically in Fenimore Lane, and I know they feel very strongly that we take a close look at it, almost in conjunction with the project. And I know we have our project has been running on a track where we've obviously put things in motion to renovate the stable and renovate other key parts of the park with the parking lots and the pavilion. But there is I'll call it a groundswell of residents that, although they understand the stable and the stable's importance, but they feel the pond is more important, and that we have to take a look at that. And I know that they're ready to come out and have those discussions with us. So I wanted to bring it forward tonight. This is another one of these topics I want to keep on everybody's radar and on the forefront of our discussions, especially since we know right now we're about to bid the stable to see what those costs come back at. We know we are anticipating hopefully them being within a budget range that helps us complete the project with the other areas that we know we want to get done, again, like the pavilion, parking lots, the accessibility, to and within the park. And then also, we have to give some consideration to how this is going to fit into that puzzle, given we only have a finite amount of money. And I know we've talked about all that, and I'm not going to go back into all the details unless you really want me to on, that. There was a June 17th meeting, a presentation that I made to the Board of Commissioners on the stable, on the project. If you guys haven't watched that, I know I've shared that link. Make sure you take a look at that. I tried to take a detailed look at the beginning of where we started and where we've come, the whole road that we've traveled on this project to where we had gotten to at that point, and being in a position now to bid the stable, which is going to potentially be happening here in the next month. But the pond, I think the pond, if we were to look into the crystal ball into 2025 and the prospect of potential capital funding, which are, totally different conversation that's going to be had, and I'll give an update on that here in a little bit. I definitely want to make sure that the pond is given consideration as we move forward, so that we can make an investment there and save it. I mean, the usage has been reduced. We used to see a lot of people fishing throughout the summer, and at different times it seems that, the visiting residents that come to experience it has definitely trailed off a lot this summer, which is concerning. And I'm concerned for the wildlife and just the overall health. And again, tying back to the investment here, we really need to come up with a short, mid, and long-term plan to
Tammy,
inject, the
Tammy,
preservation of the health for the pond.
what kind of numbers are we looking at here for a short-term fix versus a long-term fix? What kind of numbers?
Short-term skimming, I can definitely, within the township's range of internal approval, which is the $7,500 mark, we can get that done and get it done very quickly. So I actually been having those conversations with the township manager to see, how we can do that and fund that here coming down the stretch at the end of the year. I think it is something we'd like to see happen quickly.
But
where exactly those dollars will come from,
more
it's
definitive
out of the operating fund or somewhere else. I think we can make that happen, but that to skim the pond and at least get the blanket of muck or algae, I'll call it, that's built up. And if anybody has seen it, it's significant.
That's for one season though.
Of algae that's laying out there like a heavy blanket, just shutting off, everything and anything that's, getting into the water.
What is, Tammy,
sunlight, light, oxygen, all of that. So about $7,500. I can get a crew out there 2 to 3 days and work on this, give or take. Don't quote me. I mean, these are all preliminary ballpark.
I would
numbers.
assume the definitive fix though is to drain and to clean out the pond, right? How much would that be?
So I only have preliminary numbers at this point. There's dredging. I do not have numbers on right at this moment. Dredging will essentially reestablish the historic depths or establish new depths, should we want that, and that's going to come, those understandings would come with further studying the pond to see what, would be a good investment for the future. And there's ways to do it selectively, and dredging is really coming in and excavating, which is a very big project and a very expensive project. I can't even give you a ballpark, but I know that it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. So probably not the best option, but there are alternatives. There's, again, I mentioned mechanical harvesting and hydro raking, where they don't necessarily require the level of permitting as well that dredging does, and can come in with machinery, um, basically with buckets on it to come in and rake and pull out. Again, it can be a selective portion of the pond. We know this is 2.82 acres in size. It's huge. If we think we only want to do one portion of it, we can do that. If we want to do the whole thing or section, those are certainly options, and those would come at different costs. I do have the projects allocated in the capital budget. I mean, the capital budget's not funded right now, but it's a long list of many, many projects. But I certainly would be prepared to drill into those numbers in more detail and get, what I'll call is, more of a harder look at what the cost would be, but probably still at the tune of, maybe $100,000 to get a significant portion of it done, give or take. There's also the option of doing a bio dredge, which is basically a submersive system, a series of systems that would be laid out in a configuration throughout the bottom of the pond, that would inject a series of enzymes and chemicals into the bottom of the pond to help dissolve and mitigate the proliferation of all of the sediment that's there. It probably would take a long time to see any growth, or see any benefit from a system like that, but that's something else that I looked into, because I did meet with a company that can do that. That might take a series of years to actually be able to see the change. And that's not only just the investment of the installation of the compressors and the system that would go in the bottom of the pond, but it also is a monthly maintenance, and basically fee to come in and put the chemicals and everything in that are needed in order to generate the enzymes that would be released into the system to help, basically start to dissolve the sediment and counteract the sediment. So there's a lot of options. Again, I wanted to bring it forward because I feel it's really important, especially part of the conversation and just the overall importance within the park system, because the pond is such an essential piece. People, rent the pavilion for the pond. We're hoping at some point to get programming back that has environmental programs and outdoor programs where they're able to, use the pond like they did in the past. And seeing that on the horizon and knowing where we are with the project, I wanted to bring it forward just to let you know that I'm looking into it. I want to continue to look into it. We have residents that are very strongly in support of it being a priority. And I'm not trying to confound at all, the road we've traveled. Fenimore Woods has been a long discussion for us and for this board in particular, going on a decade. So again, tonight's discussion was more informational, but from a maintenance standpoint, getting the algae off the pond right now is definitely of importance and something that we will potentially move on sooner versus later.
Have you talked to the Fenimore Woods group as to this issue? In other words, what is the residents, I'm saying, what is their opinion as to the importance of this new, shall I say, new issue? Are they supportive of it? What do they want to do?
So I have not had conversations with them directly on it. I have to believe that the pond is important to them as well. Where it ranks in importance, stable, other components of the park, I certainly don't want to speak for them. I know that some of their members have a strong interest in the pond. So I'd like to think that, there is an interest here for the township to take a closer look at this and take a serious look at this, concurrent to to the current discussions, not certainly to hold the project up in any way, but to potentially be able to align funding. We knew early on in the project that a serious investment into the pond was going to be very, very expensive. We had those discussions, which was why we had the 2017 study done. And out of that, the recommendations came to dredge the pond, which we knew was going to be, again, upwards of a couple $100,000 at least then. I don't know what that would cost now to be able to restore the elevations and the depths of the pond, to open it up and restore that health to it. So
As
again,
a-
I don't want to speak for them, but I do think that they, knowing some of their members and some of the discussions I've just had with them offline, I think they will understand the importance, but I don't know if necessarily to now, kind of come to the top
But
of.
as a
list.
process, it is up to us to make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, et cetera, and they would have to approve it. However, you did say, I thought you did, that for $7,500 roughly, I'm not holding you to that, you could do a skimming, and that you probably we had the funds, or who, in other words, could we, as a board, vote on that to go ahead, and would that have to be approved by the board? My concern here, not concern, my concern really is let's deal with the problem. And yes, I mean, we'd love to dredge the whole thing and make a nice, wonderful thing, but that's not going to get the stable, that's not going to get the whole process done. And to me, if you were to spend $7,500 and do a skimming process, of what I call, could we vote on that, and could we approve that?
You certainly could make a motion to support it, if that's the will of the Parks Board. I do not know if it will be something that will go before the Board of Commissioners, because our township manager has authorization to approve anything up to $7,500. So it would be a project that we could accomplish without going to the commissioners. It would be certainly something we would apprise them of. I know there are members of the commissioners here tonight. And I know Bill has regular meetings with the president and the vice president weekly. So they certainly would be advised of it, but there are often times when we do have maintenance projects in the parks and everywhere across the township, that are under that threshold that get approval. So I mean, but your support absolutely would be fantastic to it. I think it does show that commitment, but that's not something I was here tonight to put pressure on the Parks Board to do. I believe that we can get it done with dollars that are not the bond dollars, because I feel this is a maintenance issue at this point, versus a capital investment, which would be putting, a major piece of machinery into the pond and doing work, especially given that the numbers I had mentioned that something like that would ultimately cost, or even fountains at that point, would be something that the board would have to authorize, and that would be an investment that would potentially be, and that's, we're talking long-term on fountains. We're not ready for fountains yet. They're just not going to function until we can get this thing opened up, to where those can then go in, and then those help maintain the pond, thereafter. Those certainly don't mitigate the need to dredge or rake or do any of the things that I'm talking about, just as the skim that I'm referring to is not going to all of a sudden magically make the pond better. It's just a short-term step to hopefully bring the blanket that's on it off, and restore some oxygenation and oxygen to the pond. Because right now, I think it would be really scary inside there for some of the fish that are still thriving, where their depths and their volume of what they have available to them are shrinking. That worries me. But again, where this would be funded, I don't want to quote. I actually was set up to have a meeting with Bill tomorrow morning and talk about that. But I personally envision it as a maintenance project where we could bring it out of remaining maintenance park funds, that we have here coming down the end of the year.
Tammy?
Well, I don't know whether I'd be out of,
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
no, go ahead.
Go
You
ahead.
can finish, you were in conversation.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know whether I'm out of place and out of order, but to me, I'd like to make a motion that we spend up to $7,500 to do, and we'll call it a skimming project. I don't know whether that's the right term. But I think that will get things moving and get the whole process of everything at least taking steps forward. Now, they're short term, I realize that, but it's a step. Because if we go and try to, propose larger dredging and things like that, it'll get bogged down and, again, keep this Fenimore Woods project on the back burner. And I want to see the whole project move forward, so.
I second
I
your
would
motion.
just like to,
So I'd like to make a motion,
I second.
and we have a second.
Oh, sorry.
Not to be the lawyer of the group, but I think there's still discussion pending.
I'm
before we take
sorry,
a
you're
motion.
right. I butted in, I apologize.
so based on what I heard you say, Tammy, there's a few things that come to mind. The first thing is that we've worked really, really hard on, getting to a good place on this Fenimore, park and all that's supposed to happen there. And it sounds like the pond has always been somewhere in the back of our minds, but it was not a part of the conversations that have gone on this spring and this summer. But at the same time, I also do see it as a maintenance and a safety issue. I know how important the fishing is in this community. It's good for the kids. It's just a good thing to have. But I also don't agree with just putting a Band-Aid on it, because it sounds like there's something that's been brewing and going on for years, and the opportunity to address it when let's get this algae or whatever off and out or whatever. But I also was very fond of what you said in terms of infusing the pond with the chemicals, I think it was, or some type of treatments that would allow it to not be a annual, biannual thing, because it's going to come back based on the history of it if we're not proactive. So in my opinion, yeah, let's dredge it, let's get, the original, stuff off, but let's also be proactive and do something that's going to allow it to not continue to bring us to this point. To me, that's a better use of funds than just putting a Band-Aid on it, because it's going to come back unless we're being proactive. That's just based on what you said. That's what I see.
And basically, I support that effort. My whole thought process is that, let's get it started and explore and continue the discussion about the chemicals, the dredging, and all things above my pay grade. But I just I think that for the sake of the whole project, I think if we get this short-term Band-Aid, that'll be a start. But be cognizant of the fact that we have to deal with it long-term. And again, whether the chemicals or the dredging, again, above my pay grade, but it also is above my tolerance of money, I think. So
Understood.
so as I say, I have no problem if the board does not want to do that, but I still think that I would make that motion, and we could take it for a vote and see what happens.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to triage it. This seems to be a pressing matter. The professionals have identified it. I think it is not a huge cost sink, but I do think it needs to be revisited long-term. But I also know we are now about 10 years into this project, and I don't want to take every dollar we're going to spend on parks for the next 10 years to dedicate to one park. So I think we need to look at it both in the grander scheme of this park as well as the grander scheme of all of our parks. And of course, we don't have any funding for anything beyond the bond and the $7,500 potentially for that park anyway. So a lot of this is academic.
I'd just like to ask, Tammy, with the $7,500 was going to take care of what portion of it again?
So that was, I would be able to have the company come in with, they basically have an amphibious machine that they bring in and they'll run over the pond. It's like a boat, and they'll skim the pond essentially and remove all of this, they call it emergent aquatic vegetation that has collected, and they'll essentially cut it and move it off, and they'll offload it to a site on the park site where we designate, because it will have to dewater, and then we will have to move it out. So still is a portion of work we're going to have to do along with it. So for $7,500, I can get them out there for about a maximum of 3 days. They are estimating it'll take them 2 to 4 days to do. They are fine with me setting a limit on them. Again, if I was to set, a cost ceiling, to which, we wouldn't have to take it to the Board of Commissioners. It obviously gets the job done much quicker. We don't have to go through, extensive approval process. But by the same token, if we feel we need that time, we certainly would, or we need extra time to do it, we would want to take that before the board, get it approved, get the whole thing done. And again, that's a conversation I'd be having with the township manager tomorrow to make that decision. The company does believe they can do it in 3 days. Again, we can set that cap on them. So hopefully that answers your question. I apologize if it doesn't.
No, it does. It does.
Try and
I just wanted to see.
Jump back into it.
I just wanted to see what how it would benefit the livestock that are in there too. So I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to pretend to know the language to put out there.
Oh, sorry.
As I look at him.
We've now discussed it, except for Commissioner Riley may have something. And
Yeah, sorry. So the $75, because the board member up there made a good point. Like, we can pay the $7,500, clear it off, but it's not going to get rid of the roots, and it's going to happen again. So we don't want to pay $7,500 every year. And so the company you talked to, Tammy, like, they probably know about the non-toxic chemicals to use, and then there's good plants to put in there, like lilies and stuff, that help oxygenate the air, same as the sprinkler thing. Like, do they have suggestions? Like, are they the company to go to for that, or they just take the algae? Like, normally you take the algae, but then you still have to do these other steps. Do you know what?
So the company that would be coming in to remove the algae, which, yeah, it's a quick fix. No doubt about it, it's a quick fix. But by the same token, we are headed into the winter months, the colder months, where the growth of the algae tends to slow and or dissipate anyways.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, coming out of this non-rainy season, I don't know what's going to happen this fall, especially if our weather, our temperatures tend to stay on the higher side.
Yeah.
It could leave this blanket on there for a much longer time. But so they do an array of services. This is one of the services that they do that some of the other companies don't do, that will help at least open it up. Again, I think the worry is just the wildlife, the aquatic wildlife, if you will, that exists within the pond. There's definitely a concern for the amount of water volume they have available to them to live in.
Right. And even the algicide.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, so like even the algicide, they use stuff that's good, that the fish, isn't bad for the fish. Like, after they take the algae away, they'll put like an algicide in, but they put ones that are safe for fish.
Well, we don't have a contract with them to do that.
Yeah.
So we do have a separate company, Weeds Inc., that treats both the Fenimore Pond as well as the Willows Pond on a regular basis.
Okay.
They put 2 chemicals in a couple times a year. And they've been doing that at Fenimore for years. But, when I dug deeper into this to see what was happening, there was nothing that was showing me that there was a benefit. it wasn't reducing the algae, it wasn't reducing the sedimentation. So it didn't seem like it was something that was even working. Now, once the algae is off the pond, maybe that's something we can get them back out to put in the pond that helps sustain it. I don't see it being something, if we did nothing
Right.
between now and next June, that it alleviates the problem next year.
Yeah,
So
correct.
you're absolutely right. It would be, I forget who had mentioned it, but this is a problem we would turn around and have again next year with no rain, high temperatures, high heat, high heat, high temperatures, lack of water flow, coming through the pond. And this has been an annual occurrence. So anybody that has been looking at the pond over the last few years have seen that it's been a growing problem. So, we continue to lose water volume because of the amount of sediment, that's growing on the bottom. So it seems like any commitment that would have to be made, for long-term investment, is going to have to come with a deeper removal process of sedimentation. Because that sedimentation is just continuing to grow and grow and grow and fester on itself, and then therefore creating the blanket of algae that's accruing on the top of the pond. And,
All right.
like diving into this a little bit more and learning more, like the pond is an investment. It, there has to be a plan to maintain it, especially a pond of this nature where, we have road that runs right alongside of it with a culvert that essentially is bringing in contaminated water. The water that's running through the weir is storm water. It's got runoff. It's got oil and, pesticides and all kinds of things that are coming through it. And all of that is essentially making its way into the pond. And then if it doesn't flow through the pond, and through the outflow at the back of the pond, it's just resonating inside of it. And this is something that, this runoff has collected for years and years, which is what explains why the western side of the pond, it has the lack of depth. We could walk right through it right now if we wanted to. It's probably only about a foot high, in depth because of everything that has collected. Maybe 18 inches, 2 feet in certain areas, but it's certainly not enough to sustain, its future. So not only are we going to have to be mindful of that, and there is going to have to be careful consideration, I believe, into additional investment on the perimeter, especially on that side, to plant ground absorbing and sediment absorbing types of plants that are native, to be able to provide that catch.
Yeah, and clean it up.
And build that buffer. Any healthy pond is going to have a significant buffer of the right type of vegetation around it, and that's something that we have lost also all around the Fenimore Pond. That is going to have to be yet another investment. I know we tried to tackle a little bit of that on the heels of the culvert project. If you go out there, you'll see some plantings that we had John Hosback put in the ground around there, right at the perimeter, that runs parallel to the weir.
Right.
But certainly not enough. There's more of an investment that's going to need to be made to build that establishment concurrent, to an ongoing process of protecting the asset.
Yeah, and I drove by it before I came here. The further down is the eastern ponds. Are they running into the same thing? Because I didn't look at those.
I don't think they are. I believe they have, I'm not sure what kind of work they've done on their ponds over the years, but I do know that they are at least in a situation where they've been able to have aerators. They have pond fountains.
Yeah.
And pond fountains really are not, they're not the be all and the end all solution either. So, not to go down this road, but at some point we're going to have to look at the Willows too. The Willows has sedimentation that is continuing to build as well. The ponds do a great job of circulating the water, but they're certainly not the long-term investment to reduce the subsurface sedimentation that collects and builds and just multiplies.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Sorry for the...
No, that's okay. Hopefully I answered everybody's question. And again, tonight I wasn't necessarily looking for the board to vote. But if you want to, take that step, I'm certainly not going to tell you not to. But I wanted to put the pond on your radar because I think it's something that we probably will hear more about as time goes on.
I'm not, again, I'm not going to pretend to know the words to set up here, so I will leave that to our illustrious lawyer here.
I think Mr. Orr made a motion which was seconded to recommend that the township proceed as Tammy outlined with the expenditure of up to $7,500 to take the steps to address the urgent need on the allergy at this point in time. And I think that was the end of your motion, right?
Yes.
All right. So we have a first and a second, so you can call to a vote.
Well, we've had a motion. Are we ready to vote here? So how do I do this?
All in favor?
All in favor? I'm sorry.
Aye.
Any nays? None. None. So we have approved it for Tammy to go ahead and for up to 7,500, right? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tammy, I know you're under the weather, and I know we've been here, close to 2 hours already, an hour and a half or so. Are you okay to continue, or?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Old business, Fenimore Woods Park renovation project?
So, just an update that, and I think I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. We are going to be reviewing the stable bid documentation shortly. By the end of the month, Seiler Jury is working on assembling that along with their concurrent contractors integral to the project for the rehabilitation of the stable. We'll be taking a firm review of that and then anticipating that the project will get to bid hopefully by the end of October. I know myself and of course our township engineer will be reviewing it in detail. And then at that point, we'll be on a bidding schedule that I'll have probably more detail and can outline in October. Project will go to bid, we'll receive bids back. Bid should be out for a few weeks, maybe up to a month. I have to take a look at the timeline. And then, this is a big piece of the project that, we'll hopefully have in at a reasonable cost. And then there's still authorizations from there that would need to be made. So just to remind the board that just because we get the bids back does not mean that we're expending on the project. This will give us an understanding of what the costs look like. Ultimately, it'll be brought before the Board of Commissioners for their potential authorization. And then at that point, that will be sort of the catalyst at that point, if you will, to start to assemble the remaining parts of the project. Again, tying back to my presentation from June 17th, if you get an opportunity, make sure you take a look at that.
Okay. Any questions? If not, Arterisio Park and Improvements Planning?
Sure. So one of the also recent authorizations that we were given by the commissioners at the July meeting was to engage in a park land boundary survey along with topographical survey. That is underway. We're also starting to look at the concept development for an initial concept plan that will ultimately come before the Parks and Recreation Board, along with, gathering the neighbors to take that first look. I don't expect that the initial plan will be the be-all and the end-all. None of them are. That'll give us an opportunity as a starting point to take a look at how we move forward. I know that we had about 2 years of public meetings and gained a lot of public input. You will see a lot of that public input go into that initial concept plan. There may be some public input that does not go into that initial public plan and concept plan. That doesn't mean that, those items still can't be incorporated. But again, this will be a first look for conversation and continued public dialogue on the project in hopes that, we soon are able to start to identify what the improvements will look like, what the scope of the project will look like, and then ultimately be able to identify what the cost estimates will look like. As of right now, for any capital budget detail that's going to the commissioners, there are numbers in that are placeholders. So just a reminder on that too, that the park boundary survey as well as the concept plan development is all being funded out of the Delco Greenways grant that we were able to generate. So those, I anticipate a large portion, if not all, of those costs will be funded out of that grant. And if you'll recall, this board had passed a recommendation onto the Board of Commissioners that any remaining costs at that point with regards to the planning and the concept development of the plan would come out of the Park Impact Fund. So this is a separate fund from the general obligation bond that is funding Fenimore. This is separate from the capital plan that we have that's currently unfunded with a litany of projects. But we do have that Park Impact Fund that's generated based on our land development ordinance that bestows money based on essentially development going on throughout the township on a formulated basis that does allow for some money to be available at all our discretion and ultimately the Board of Commissioners approval to be able to expend towards projects. So if you're looking for a timeline on when I think we'll look at that concept plan, I'm hoping within the next couple of months. The park boundary survey took a lot longer than was expected. We were hoping to hopefully be before the board in October or November at least with an initial look at the plan. I'm just not sure that we're on target for that right now.
Okay. Are we still able to have meetings going forward of I guess what we would like to see happen in Arterisio?
Absolutely. So again, the concept plan is really just a springboard to re-energize those conversations and actually have a visual to look at.
Okay.
And then to start to come out and say, okay, like here's what we want to see, here's what we don't want to see, here's where we want to move, if we want to move the comfort station, add a pavilion, if we want to, move the playground, shift things around. I know there's not a whole lot of, we're not going to move the baseball field, but, we do have some of the ancillary areas there where we can be creative, and I certainly believe that our consultants will help us in being creative, especially once we understand the land boundaries, where the property lines end and begin. I think those are important in some of the key areas, as well as understand the topographical information.
Okay. Thank you.
Quick question. Are most of these things roughly covered in the compendium of information that you handed out? In other words, I'm looking at Arterisio and Fenimore Woods and all that, and a lot of these subjects are sort of covered there. Is there any redundancy here? And the reason I ask that is because I'm worried about your health. No, I mean, it's just, a lot of these things are covered in your report, which I thought was tremendous. So I think this is great, and I think you've done a wonderful job. And when you keel over here a little bit because you're tired and, I just think that a lot of these things are covered here, and we might be able to go through them somewhat quickly. Like the Township Comprehensive Plan, we probably could be here till about midnight for that, and I don't think that that's to your benefit, and I'm not sure how the other members feel. So my recommendation is that we briefly explore the possibility of going through these quickly with asking the board members to read all of the 9 pages of your report. I don't know whether that's a motion or whatever that is. Our lawyer here will tell us that. I don't know.
I think that sounded like a plea.
Exactly.
I would concur. I think we're in the mood. We could just summarize for the evening. So.
Yes. I would just ask that on item E, the trail project, if you could just say a few words on that, because I know that's been completed, and the park's been, and the trail's been opened up. And for the rest of it, I would just say, I would concur with the rest of with the other board members as mentioned. Just for the sake of you, Tammy, that we don't keep you here any longer.
I really appreciate that. Was there a specific question on the trail, on a specific trail project? Was it?
No, just
Or,
just to a quick synopsis of it's been completed, and I mean it looks very nice. I walk it just about every other day now, as I go to a basketball clinic just down the pathway there. It looks really nice, and I didn't realize it had impacted as much as it did, even on West Wayne Avenue, because I'm noticing that the ponding there, after it rains, it's no longer there under the bridge from that with the drainage.
okay, you said G, not E. Okay, sorry. That's just the muffled way I heard it. I apologize. So you mean West Wayne Preserve project?
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, meaning
Preserve.
that, yes, yes.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Both have been completed. And I know our township engineer has been on site in a couple of the last storms, especially the one that happened in August, and everything is functioning much better. Especially the porous pave that has been installed in the parking lot of Friends of Radnor Trails Park. It's functioning and doing its job, as was the flooding that typically does come down through South Devon, as well as West Wayne Avenue. He was very pleased with what he was seeing during that last storm. But yeah, we're very excited about that project being completed. I expect next month we're going to take this one off of our agenda, and close the book there. Hopefully, until a future project would emerge potentially at either of those two sites. But very excited about the project, and overall its functionality, and looking forward to adding some signage, some updated and new signage to both of the locations, at West Wayne Preserve and at Friends of Radnor Trails Park, as well as hopefully on the near term here, generating some educational signage as well to explain everything that has happened, particularly in the West Wayne Preserve, where I know there's still a lot of curiosities.
I have a very highly technical question. This will be, again, above my pay grade. I pass there twice a day, and are trees supposed to be growing up in the white things? Because I find very few trees growing up on those. I find a lot of trees and flora and fauna, but I don't see any growing up in the middle of those white things. But there will be trees growing up there?
There will be. They're white. They allow for the light penetration, which is why they're not opaque in any way, or in any other type of darker color. I know the white is definitely eye-catching. But yes, the trees will be growing through there. They're there for their guidance to, move through that area and keep them stable so that the wind doesn't
Yep.
distract them or break them in any way, as well as any wildlife that may get into the park. I realize there's a fence around the park, but there's still opportunity for wildlife to get in there. So ultimately, yes, the thought is that there will be growth there and hopefully
That's-
significant growth. We just need a lot of rain. I know we have a contract where those areas are being watered, which is good at that site, but obviously more rain, the more rain, the better, in that regard. To help the growth.
Well, you can see that I'm highly qualified in this area, so I appreciate the explanation.
Okay, any other concerns before we leave, just to make sure that nobody has any questions? And if not, we'll make a motion to go ahead and adjourn for the evening. Second, okay. It has been moved and second.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks, Tammy.
Bye now.